Hello and welcome to another video. Today I want to talk about the roles, what their main advantages are, disadvantages, and who should pick what role, and maybe some cool stuff in every role. I don't know. Something like that anyway. So if we get right into it, with top lane, we have the positives, right? Why do people actually play top lane? Well, it's a 1v1 lane. It's like the most 1v1 lane in the game. It snowballs the hardest. It has more of a forced fight for people. So if you play stuff like mid lane, like a lot of people will just scale to like level 5, 6 and then perma wave clear and just never play the game again and just not exist. Literally just be a fucking NPC for the rest of the game, right? So that can be pretty annoying. Maybe we can do this also. The game looks a bit better. While in top lane, this doesn't really happen as much because you have a lot of these melee matchups and whatever else, right? Or even if it's ranged against melee, still it's really snowbally. It ends up being like a fight anyway. It just ends up being like a short fight instead of a long fight if it's ranged against melee. So then what else do we have, right? We have the fact that this role can bully the rest of the map. So like if you snowball on top lane, you get to like take every tower, you get to take the enemy jungle, you're completely unkillable oftentimes, and you get to like just run around like a demon king, right? It also scales well. It can focus on mechanics pretty well, so you can focus on like fighting. You can learn your combos, you can learn your trade patterns, you can learn your whatever else, right? And it's all going to be really impactful, and that is enjoyable for people who like a more fighting game type of game. So what are the bad parts of top lane, right? So this role probably has the least impact early game on the rest of the map because jungle can gank, mid lane can roam, support can roam, even ADCs can roam. I mean, top lane can also roam, but the problem is that like if you drop a wave as any other role, okay, whatever. If you drop like a wave or two on top lane, suddenly you're getting frozen on, you're like 2 levels down, you can't play the game, you're perma melee, you need like 10 ganks to get back into the game, and it's kind of doomed. Then you also rely on disgustingly overpowered champions because unless the enemy top laner is an OTP, he will most likely play something disgustingly overpowered. And your role doesn't have like a role strength, right? This is what top laners usually complain about, and this is what you will hear from top laners. So top laners will say that their role doesn't do this, their role doesn't do that, right? And why is their role still good, and why do people still think their role is strong anyway, right? And why can it carry? Well, because their champions are like disgustingly overpowered usually. And so say stuff like Fiora, like everyone who doesn't play top lane hates Fiora, and even most top laners hate Fiora. And why is that? Well, very simply, the reason that happens is because in that champion's case, like if she gets ahead at all, she starts stat checking everyone on the map while also having outplay potential at the same time. And that champ was overtuned for such a long time. I don't think it's considered as broken right now, but it was considered so disgustingly broken before. So that's an issue, right? Then a gank or a misplay can just end your game. Like if you get ganked once or twice, then suddenly you need like 5 ganks from your jungler to fix that. If you get solo killed, you also start needing like 3 ganks from your jungler to fix that. And pretty much no jungler is going to want to do that, especially because oftentimes you can even get 1v2'd by the enemy top laner. So what else is an issue, right? You don't have Dragon on your side of the map, which is fine because you do have Herald, and Herald is pretty good until 10 minutes. But after 10 minutes, it feels pretty meh because you want to have impact on dragons. So Soul can be a win con, but because you don't have impact on the first one, so like 5 to 10 minutes, the earliest that you can actually secure the Soul yourself is something like 30 minutes, right? And that's even pretty early. Like that would mean that at 10 minutes you started like actually impacting it, and most likely you're gonna start impacting it at 15 minutes. So the soul that you yourself secure is probably gonna end up being like 35 minutes. Obviously, you can just walk bot lane and then TP back to top, which is pretty good, but can be pretty awkward. Okay, so what else do we have, right? There is one more issue that I see with this lane, and that is perma roaming or tank playstyles can make it really, really stonewalled. So if you play against stuff like Janna top lane or Malphite or something, and your champ can't deal with that easily, then you just get stonewalled and you can't do anything, kinda, it feels like, right? So like they're roaming around the whole map, they're doing whatever they want, they're like Shen ulting the whole map, and yeah, you're ahead, but the whole enemy team is ahead, and that guy's utility, so he has impact anyway. So then you're just like, oh, well, I have to somehow come back from this, which is pretty disgusting. And this happens in jungle as well when you play like these scaling farming junglers. Like, you will end up in a position where you're just thinking, how can I do anything, right? And that's pretty difficult. Okay, so in what case should you then play top lane? If you want to be some kind of melee 1v1 fighter in a fighting game, this role is great for you. It has some cool melee mechanics, it has trading pattern learning, it has vision tricks, it has combos, so you will enjoy it. Like, for example, as a melee champion, you can walk forward and the enemy will start walking back, and then you can walk back and make some space. You can also do the opposite, you can walk back and they will walk forward, and then you walk into them and you get them closer, and you can outplay like that with movement, you can outplay with vision from bushes and stuff. So if you like stuff like that, it could be a great role for you. Alright, so next up we have jungle, right? So we talk about jungle a decent amount here, so let's go through it a bit faster at least. So ganks can have a lot of impact early, right? Everyone knows that. Then you can snowball pretty well in mid game because your XP scales up in mid game and you start actually getting XP from lanes and stuff. Pretty cool, right? Pretty cool. You also have good playmaking ability, so if you want to actually fight somewhere, you can do that pretty well. That's nice. You can choose to fight a lot, so if you play these champs like Lee Sin, like in the replay we've been watching, he's fighting quite a lot, so pretty cool. Then you have versatile playstyles. You can be like a support, you can be like a frontliner, you can be an assassin, some kind of a mage or something, so pretty cool. You can also like gank, you can farm, you can do like a mix of both, you can whatever you want really. It is less matchup dependent than other roles, so for example, while you might think that, say, I don't know, some matchup is just horrible if you were to play the lane. I don't know, let's look at this matchup, Lee Sin Gragas, right? You would think that, well, I mean, how is Lee Sin supposed to do much to Gragas? And okay, that's fair. You can also think of it the other way. You can think like, well, Lee Sin at the moment can actually stat check Gragas or whatever. Who knows? I don't really know if he can or not because I barely see these two champions face up in lane, but that's just an example, right? But in jungle, it doesn't really matter, right? Because, like, for example, right now, Lee Sin is just avoiding Gragas. Like, he's not meeting up with him. Or you can also say Gragas is avoiding Lee Sin, but either way, they're not meeting. So it does tend to be less matchup dependent than other roles. So matchups can still matter. Like, if you play, like, I don't know, Kha'Zix or Evelynn to Rengar, it's not going to be fun for you, for example. Then, after that, another good thing is that the meta champs are usually pretty easy to play. So think of the meta like the Udyr meta and stuff, like it completely brain dead, like Udyr Zac. Like, come on, bro. Then a high impact on objectives control is pretty good. But the problem with this is that, okay, well, you do have high impact on objective control because you start objectives, you show up to them most of the time, you can secure them with smite and stuff, and that's all good. you can choose also where to play and with who, right? So you can choose if you want a strong side bot lane, if you want a strong side mid, top, whatever, if you want to invade, if you want to like play more defensive, whatever, right? So you have quite a bit of impact in terms of that. But then now, what's the bad stuff of this, right? Like this role sounds like it has a lot of impact. Well, ganks are heavily laner dependent. So for example, in this game, you have Ezreal Yumi against Zeri Pike, so good luck ganking that. He did gank it sometime, but it's so much harder than it has to be. Like, if you just have like Nautilus something, I don't know, and then enemy has like Sona and some immobile ADC, like it's a lot easier to gank, right? So kind of problematic with stuff like that. Like here you also have no CC in mid lane, you also have like mech CC in top lane, so Monka, right? Meanwhile, if you get like, imagine you play Nidalee, right? You play Nidalee and the team that Lee Sin is playing in, it's completely unfun to play. Like no one has CC for you, no one has setup, like everyone can dash an enemy. You play Nidalee, an enemy team suddenly, oh, top lane has point and click CC, bot lane has CC support with engage, and so on. So it does make a pretty big difference. Mid game can also be really unplayable if laners are behind. So I said that you get more XP and stuff, but the problem is if you're not getting jungle camps in mid game, then suddenly the only thing you can actually do is sit there and try to collect waves, which can be really awkward, honestly. Then XP is also kind of a joke, and catch-up XP and mechanics akin to it are really obnoxious, because when you get into the game, the catch-up XP will... like if the enemy makes big mistakes, like the catch-up XP will catch them back up into the game, right? And that's just I don't know. Like you mess up the enemy jungler really badly, but then they catch up anyway. And early, it's kind of hard to really build huge leads, but mid game you can build like a pretty big lead, unless like you play something that like completely clears everything at the same time, takes enemy camps and like invades them and stuff. You're not really gonna build a huge lead early game, right? In terms of XP. Then the role is still overcomplicated for beginners. Like, okay, it's more forgiving because you have catch-up XP and stuff, but the moment when mid-game comes around, if you make like a mistake or two in mid-game, you suddenly fall like 2 levels behind, 3 levels behind, 4 levels behind. You miss an opportunity to take like the enemy 3 jungle camps, he takes your jungle camps, 1 level behind, again 2 levels behind, again 3 levels behind. You're behind and enemy jungler suddenly starts taking the side lane waves, okay, 4 levels behind. So that is pretty interesting, to say the least. Then there's a lot of high risk, high reward gameplay in this role, which makes it kind of coin flippy. Like for example here, like Lee Sin is perma like fighting, and if he misplays the fights, well, you're fucked. But if he plays them good, then he can get kills, he can maybe get like really ahead. Sometimes you can walk lane to lane and just collect kills in every lane. Sometimes you can't get anything, and like if the enemy jungler is walking lane to lane and getting kills in every lane, and you're getting nothing, then suddenly the role becomes really awkward, and you're like, let's say gapped, but you're not really gapped because you didn't do anything wrong, you just didn't have or find an opportunity, right? But the enemy jungler just found it easily. Like that can happen. It can really happen. Then we also have the thing where I said, yeah, you have meta champs, which are pretty brain dead and easy and whatever, but the problem is that they're also pretty unfun, and as I said, brain dead, right? So like, okay, you can play Udyr and Zac, but do you want to play Udyr and Zac? That's the question, right? Like, when that was the complete meta and everyone played it every game, like, did you want to play Udyr and Zac? That's a question, right? Like, right now, do you want to play Gragas? That champ is completely overpowered. Like, it does insane damage, insane tankiness, insane everything, but, like, do you want to play it? You can still be messing up, like this guy just did, obviously, on that champ, but like it's a lot easier than other champs. Like if he messed up like that on some off meta champ, he would likely just die. because he's building AP. Okay, then after that, we don't have too much control over lane and waves, and at some points of the game, this makes contesting objectives way harder. Like enemy jungle will show up anyway, but not all the laners show up, right? But that means that if you're a laner, then you showing up actually makes a difference. If you're a jungler, then it's just expected that you show up, right? So kind of awkward there, and it's also expected that you will just be there while the laners can do a lot more. Like they can push out the lanes in a good timing, they can show up at a good timing, they can whatever, right? And you have to like make picks or something before it, so it's kind of a different way to impact it. And I'm not the biggest fan of it because I think mid laners can just do both, but yeah. Okay, so after that, what else do we have, right? The last issue I have for now with this role that I'm going to mention is that you can end up playing versus a lot more players the whole game than you have. So for example, enemy mid laner perma roaming, enemy support perma roaming, enemy top laner perma roaming. Suddenly you can't play the game. Like enemy support is just on the enemy jungler the whole game, and anywhere the enemy jungler goes, you can't punish because the support is just there. And your teammates are not doing anything and not getting any kind of a lead from it. So you can't get the lead, they can't get the lead. But this is a lot worse for you because you actually want to get a lead, while like bot laners don't really care if they get a lead so much, right? Like if a bot laner can make the game more stable where the jungler doesn't get kills but he also doesn't get kills, that's usually good for a bot laner. Okay, so who should play this role, right? This role I think is kind of like chess, and if you like those types of games, then this role could be pretty good for you. It's kind of turn-based. Many people do try to play it like a fighting game, like I said, and then it's kind of coin flippy. But it's more of a team fighting game rather than a 1v1 game, like top lane. So still a bit of a different thing that you can try to do. And if those things sound pretty good to you, then that's probably a role that you might enjoy, but I'm not sure if many of you will enjoy this role because I don't think many people enjoy this role. I think most of the time you have to play with mute all and you have to kind of like just focus on yourself and being like, yeah, I gapped the enemy jungler. That's like the most fun part of this role in my opinion. If you don't mute all or you don't gap enemy jungle, then it's not fun, sadly. And yeah, the classic when people just 5-man you. Lovely. Love that. Okay, so then if you move on to mid lane. So mid lane has some of the most diverse playstyles in the game. It has some aspects of every role. It can be a carry or support role. It can scale, it can roam. It has high potential and impact on both the early game and the later parts of the game. And it also gets to play both like a jungler and a laner at the same time, so it's kind of a hybrid. And it has the most champs, and they're pretty flashy. So those are some pretty good things. But basically what I said is mostly just like, okay, well, mid lane is just a jack of all trades, right? So it does a bit of everything, but it doesn't really do anything, right? Well, depending on what you pick, you might be able to do one thing like really well, or you can pick to do multiple things like pretty well. So that's also why those are the bad things. So it has aspects of every role. So while it has like a bit of that top lane trade pattern and like 1v1 and whatever, it also has the matchup issue, right? And it's to a lesser extent, but both are to a lesser extent, so pick your poison. Then meta tends to really favor archetypes. Like right now it favors anything that builds fucking Roa and Seraphs. I really hope I don't see Roa and Seraphs on Orianna. I would be so depressed. No. Ludens and Seraphs. Okay, I'm happy, I guess. I mean, it could be worse. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of the archetype that people are going for right now. And sometimes it's assassin, sometimes it's like utility, sometimes it's this and that. So yeah, you can be kind of forced into playing some kind of way. Then Okay, so what else is there? Right. So as I said, you get forced into playing either a carry or a support role, depending on the meta. But you can also have no impact early game or zero scaling, right? So because you force yourself into one thing, you end up being like really, really bad compared to the enemy on the other thing. Like if you're playing something like, let's say, Katarina, and the enemy mid laner is playing like, I don't know, let's say, actually maybe this is not the best example. Let's say that you're playing, what's like a really good example? Okay, whatever. Let's go with Katarina still. And let's say the enemy mid laner is playing like Diana or something, I don't know. So I think that that lane is better for Diana, as far as I know anyway. And she will most likely out-train. And then, okay, well, Diana's gonna roam like way worse than you. But you have to find roams, right? But it's unlikely that you find roams, and because you're so bad at doing one thing, like laning, for example, and doing anything there without a lead, suddenly like the enemy millionaire has most of the impact in the lane for a while, right? So stuff like that can happen, but I don't think this is the best example. I just can't think of one right now that's really good at showing it. Then the most frustrating thing in mid lane, in my opinion, is that you will get perma-ganked by jungle and support in certain metas, and you will feel completely useless in that case, because you can't really roam when you're perma getting ganked, because you can't really push, you can't really trade or kill enemy. So it's just like, unless the enemy mid laner is completely griefing, you can't really do much then, which obviously is normal because it's a team game and they're focusing on stopping you. But the amount of times it happens because you're in the middle of the map, so they can just drive by you and stuff, is kind of disturbing. Then, as I said, you have a lot of really annoying matchups still, because so many champs in your lane, so no matter what, you will have some matchups that just suck. And you have the most gank routes to your lane, like, you can get ganked from legit everywhere. Like, either way, no matter which mid laner you are, look at how many paths there are to your lane, right? Especially when people have ways to get over walls, it's just insane. So yeah, I would recommend this role though if you like playing a little bit of every other role, some 1v1 stuff from top lane, some team fighting from jungle, some roams and stuff from support, some scaling and doing damage from ADC. But you don't really want to commit to one niche, but you want to just do a bit of everything, but not have all of the issues or all of the benefits of any role. If that's you, then probably mid lane is the role for you. And if you want to be flashy, it also is likely the role for you. I don't know. But I mean, you can be flashy in any role if you really want to, but it's probably the easiest in mid lane because it has so many champs that do it. And also, they're not all like really high skill cap. Like some champs are flashy, but not too difficult at all. So then we can move on to the ADC role, which has some good stuff and some bad stuff as well. So the good stuff is that it's basically a walking tower. It has really high consistent DPS. It decides team fights on its own if it stays alive. It scales the best with gold. Has a support to perma protect them. It's over buffed by Freak because he's trying to get out of diamond. Everyone who plays your role will also always cry for buffs, so Riot will probably make sure that it's not too weak at least. Even if it is underpowered at some point, then they will still likely buff it because people will cry so much. That's pretty good. I mean, it's always nice to play a role where people cry a lot, so you have more impact than usual. Because if you don't cry in a role at all, then like why would they change anything, right? Like when they see the stats are abysmal, they will change something, right? But everyone complains in League. It's just like, how much do you complain and when will they start fixing it because of your complaining, kinda? That's how I see it anyway. Okay, but you also have some very overloaded champs in your role, and you have some, or well, most of your champs are pretty similar to pick up because, well, you're mostly focused on auto-attacking, right-clicking, whatever, and you're the most rewarded for just like general mechanics like that, right? So those are, I think, the real benefits of playing ADC, or well, not all of them obviously, but a decent amount of them. But what's the bad stuff then, right? So you will get focused down very much, like pretty much every game you get focused down, every fight. You can need a team to play around you to deal damage. You do scale with gold, but then that means that you're pretty weak when down gold, right? So if you're behind in items, like, you're not scaling shit, bro. Like, you do not scale. Like, other roles usually scale with levels as well, but your scaling with levels is pretty meh. Then the support that's supposed to play around you, the comms that are supposed to be built around you, and so on, they will just grief you, like, they will just weak side you, not play for you, and so on. So, gonna be very annoying with that. Then also Freak didn't get out of Diamond despite buffing ADC again, so I think that's like a negative to the role because it's a bit embarrassing to play the same role as that guy when he buffs his own role, so he would get out of Diamond and he doesn't get out anyway after 10 years. But no hate, just saying, you know, just keep it 100. Just keep it 100. Alright, so what else? Like, this role tends to not be that satisfying if you aren't very good at it, because being a walking turret is kind of weird, because you're standing here and you have like an effective range where you will do damage, but then if you don't do enough damage, then that effective range would need to be longer for you to actually be able to play. And if you do a lot of damage, then you feel like really great, right? But still, like, enemies can try to find a way to get into your range faster and not let you have enough time, right? Because basically it's like you have a kill zone, and if the enemies are in it long enough, they will die. But if they're not in it long enough, or you die during that time, then they won't die, pretty much. That's that rule. And then mastering new champs is also quite annoying on this role, despite what people might think, because it's more about stats, like out attack wind up, attack speed, and so on. And figuring out these stats exactly so you can do really well mechanically, while also figuring out all of your like the spells and how you should use your spells and whatever, it can be pretty demanding. Because in other roles, usually, like for example, if you want to learn LeBlanc, you would just you would end up playing against it anyway if you're a mid laner, right? And you would see the stuff that people do. You would see like, people use ult and then W. That's pretty cool. People use this and that. That's pretty cool. People start E sometimes. Okay, pretty cool. But you can't really see that on... I mean, you can see how people do it on ADC, like what they do. But the problem is that you still need to practice it, so... it can be annoying. I do recommend this role though if you want to be a protagonist, the most important person on the map, and the one that people usually try to get ahead or behind. And you also want to be like the last boss of fights, but of course everyone will try to get to you. And if you like feeling important but useless whenever you misplay, then this is probably the role for you. Alright, so we finally got to the last role, which is support. Of course we have a Yuumi here, classic. This is basically like a great game to showcase the duality of support. It's like, some people will play like Engage and try to play Make and stuff, and some people will just play like shit like Yuumi or Sona. So yeah. This role has a very high impact at every stage of the game, depending on what you picked. So in the early to mid game, stuff like Pyke and whatever is going to have a lot more impact, while in the mid to late game, like stuff like Yuumi is going to end up having impact. They usually overlap around mid game though. Then roams can be insanely impactful, but obviously if you play something like Yuumi, you won't even be roaming, right? And like, we look here, like, okay, they're just chilling, right? If we look at bot lane a bit. Then it is kind of like jungle, but it's not resource hungry or starved, which is pretty good. And it does have the most control over vision, so pretty good there also. It doesn't have to farm or manage waves too much. It's good if you know a bit of stuff, but like this guy, for example, is not doing shit right now, so it is good for you, I guess, kinda. It's kinda good and bad, but we'll get to the bad later. Then you have time to track stuff and shot call and stuff, but the problem is that people won't really like you shot calling because you're playing support and people consider it the most unskilled role in the game, so they will tell you like, why are you shot calling, bro? So that can be an issue for you. But yeah, you do have high playmaking ability on a lot of champs, and you have really high upfront gold. That's like the biggest advantage of support role. So your support items give you 1k gold, and also become a legendary, and also are a high gold value. So basically you reach the, say like, the 5k gold mark pretty fast into the game, right? Or 3, 4, 5k, you know? But after that, you kind of like slow down, and you start getting less and less gold, and you don't really get to like the 15, 20k gold like the other roles, right? So that's kind of the difference there. Then the bad stuff is obviously like, okay, if you have insanely high impact at some stages of the game, depending on what you pick, and that also means you have low as fuck impact at every stage of the game that your champ isn't OP in. So then it will out impact you completely then, unless there's a huge skill gap. Like if the Yumi free scales until say like 40 minutes, then Pyke will be completely useless and have 0 impact. If Pyke is completely stomping lane and perma roaming, Yumi will be completely useless until 30 minutes, right? So that's kinda the annoying part of that, right? Then you're forced to roam or sit in the lane, even if you don't want to. People will tilt and stuff like that, and this is not a very good experience. And you can never really know if what you're doing is right or wrong, because people will flame you regardless, just like jungle role, so might as well just mute them all. Go figure. Then it doesn't scale in damage and stuff like other roles, so kind of problematic as well. You do have decent base damages, and you do have really good damage in mid game, but then after that it becomes more and more awkward with that. And while it's good that you don't have to manage waves too much and farm too much and stuff, the fact that your teammates can grief farming and wave management and stuff means that at some point you would rather just do it yourself. Because if people are perma-griefing it, then it just feels really bad, right? Because you're just like, well, why am I not doing that? I would rather just do that than watch them grief it. Then having to track and shot call and stuff and stuff like that to have impact when people will refuse to listen to you is really frustrating also. Having to make plays and try to hit spells and play fights and stuff well is interesting. And the problem with this role is that while this role doesn't really teach you how to be mechanically good, it would highly prefer if you are mechanically good. Like if you play something like Nami or Lulu, it's really preferable that you have good movement, that you have like good spacing, that you're good at using auto attacks and stuff. But it doesn't teach you any of that. This role is horrible at teaching you that stuff. Like completely horrible. It also like wants you to hit every like spell and whatever else, but just teaches you none of it. And then after your, as I said, after your upfront gold comes through, like you finish your spell thief, whatever, you have a lot of gold, you're really cool, but then after that you're just like, well, what now, bro? And you're not getting shit for gold after that, like legit none. So this role is good for you if you're like a team player, a shot caller, in-game leader, if you like dives, stuff like that. If you like Heroes of the Storm, it's probably a decent role for you. If you like to play decent mechanically and decision-wise in lane and translate that into either making your ADC huge or into the rest of the map snowballing from roams and stuff, then that can be good. And the fact that you can pick where to play, how to win, and your win cons and stuff can be really good. For example, like Tyler 1 is a good example of this role, right? He likes to assess how the game is going, figure out the win cons and stuff, and then play around them, right? So that's why that role suits him really well, and that's why his support challenge went pretty much the best out of all of his challenges. Then for something like ADC, a really selfish player is gonna be good, you know, like Kumayushi is perma-quoted as like good ADC, and that's because he has the stuff that is good for an ADC. He's good mechanically, and he plays for himself, and okay, very cool, right? Then if we look at who's good in mid lane, right, and why, like, okay, you have like Showmaker, and then you have like Chovy. Those types of people get like quoted, and you have like Faker, right? And for example, Faker and Showmaker are just really well balanced players, right? And Chovy is also pretty decently balanced, but Chovy, for example, focuses on one thing more, right? So he plays more like a top laner compared to like the other mid laners. So pretty interesting there. Meanwhile, someone like Doemb plays more like a support or something. So that shows you how mid lane is a pretty diverse role, where you can succeed with a lot of stuff, but you have to find a way that you want to play. Then in jungle, like, who's really good? So I don't really want to quote Canyon and stuff. I would rather quote like more Western junglers, because they would have more obvious playstyle biases. Like for example, someone like Tarzan, who historically preferred to like clear and stuff, or I don't know, Malice or something, who prefers to like clear and stuff. And then you have people like Rush or something, who is not Western, but whatever, man. Who perma plays stuff like Lisa and perma ganks, perma fights, perma whatever, right? And both can succeed, and they're tapping into like different parts of jungle, but those are like the main two parts of jungle, right? But yeah, one of them just prefers to play it like chess, and one of them prefers to play it like a fighting game. And then in top lane, I mean, who's succeeding? It's, if you look at who's succeeding, then you're usually gonna figure out what kind of a role it is and what it wants to achieve. And in top lane, the people who succeed are usually the people who have good trading patterns and understanding of combos and stuff like that, right? Though obviously there are some people who succeed in top lane while doing the other stuff I mentioned, right? So they're really frustrating stuff for top lane, because it goes completely against the other essence of the role. And it just says, well, I'm going to play like Tarek or something like that Korean guy, you know? He just plays like Tarek and stuff. He roams bot lane, he TPs back to top, stuff like that, and can be pretty disgusting, right? Not the best experience to have. But yeah, that gives you a short overview on the roles. If you enjoyed the video, then do like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Peace.